Hello and welcome to everyone that is joining our webinar presentation today, Retrogression Update. My name is Ron Hoppe, and I am the CEO of Worldwide HealthStaff Solutions, and I'm very, very pleased and excited to be joined by my friend and colleague and leading immigration attorney in the United States, Mike Hammond. Mike, good to see you again.
Good to see you as well, Ron. Thanks for having me.
Always, Mike, always looking forward to the discussion this morning. Just a couple of things real quick before we jump into our presentation this morning. I see we've got many people logging in and joining us from all over the world. If you have not already done so, please just take a quick minute and in the chat box on your screen, the chat screen, please let us know where you're joining us from. We're always very interested to see how many countries are represented on our various presentations. So just take a moment, say hello, and let us know where you're joining us from, and we'd certainly appreciate that. As we go through our presentation today, I expect that you will have some questions. And I'd like to invite you again to just submit your question. Again, using the chat feature, we have several colleagues that are helping us in our presentation today who will be monitoring your questions. And we'll certainly do our very best to answer those once we have gone through the formal presentation. Hopefully some of your questions will be answered even as we go through the presentation. A couple of things also for you to take note of. In the chat area of your screen, you'll see there's a yellow box. We call it a Post-it note up at the top where you can actually connect live and in real time with a member of the Worldwide HealthStaff recruitment team. We have recruiters standing by and available to chat with you in real time. Secondly, you'll also see a note there where you can click on a link to get some more information on our new referral program that we're very, very excited about. It's gaining a lot of traction. We've been just really encouraged by the interest and the response that this has received. So if you're not already familiar with that, please at some point click on that link and encourage you to participate in that as well. So with that being said, I appreciate that we still have a few people logging in, but we're gonna jump right in. For those of you that have not had the opportunity of joining us on a previous presentation where we've had the good fortune of having Mike Hammond join us. As I said, I'm very, very pleased and excited to have Mike with us today. Mike has made a career, not just in immigration law, but specifically in healthcare immigration matters. And I consider him to be one of the foremost experts on the topic. As importantly as being an expert in the field, Mike also has a great a way of presenting information in a way that it's easily understandable, and sometimes, Mike, even fun, if that's possible. But every now and then, we're actually having some fun talking about some very, very serious topics. So, as I said at the outset, and the reason each of you has joined us today is to hear an update on retrogression. Everyone here will recall that back in April, on the 21st of April, the visa bulletin for May at that time indicated a retrogression. We'll talk about that. The next visa bulletin, the May visa bulletin, has come out. There was no change from the previous visa bulletin. So we're going to jump right in, take a look at what's going on. I think it's also important to have always the right perspective. So we're going to talk a little bit today about how the current situation is different from the last time that there was a retrogression, and just to ensure that we're having a clear understanding and the right perspective on where we're at today, and not just relying on the experience that maybe others would have had in previous years. So, Mike, let's start off with just a quick overview of the June 2023 Visa Bulletin and what it told us.
Okay. So, as Ron mentioned a little bit ago, the June Visa Bulletin, which came out a week or so ago, is unchanged from May. So all the dates, in whether you're from the Philippines or from the rest of the world, any category you're in, whether the typical RN category of EB3, EB2, EB1, basically it was completely unchanged, which is, first of all, not surprising. And I think we can look at it as fairly good news. One of the things that I think is important to understand is where we are in the calendar. And for all of us who work off of a yearly calendar, we're in the middle of the year, right? We're getting ready to finish May, and we're going to be right there in the middle of the year. For the government, they're actually near the end of the year. So they work off of what they call a fiscal year. So it starts October 1st and it ends September 30th. So we're getting ready to get into the last quarter, the last third of the year. The reason why that's important for visa retrogression and the Visa Bulletin is that the allotment of visas or green cards given out each year are a use it or lose it kind of formula. So let's just make this up, and let's say hypothetically there's only 10 green cards they're going to give out each year. And on October 1st, they say, here's the 10 green cards we have to give out for the year. So when all those 10 are used and given out, whether that's in February or May or August, there's no more left. So from a big picture perspective, we want the government to be efficient and to give out all of the green cards each year, which means that when we get into the summer, into the last months of the year, we expect there to be no green cards left available because we want them to be efficient, having given them all out. So when you see retrogression in the summer, or maybe even it's going to get a little worse before it gets better, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That is simply based upon where we are in the calendar year. So when you look at the June Bulletin and see no movement whatsoever, that's not a predictor of what might happen in October. It's not a predictor of where we stand, just where we stand today in June. That's it. That's all it is.
Right. And the Visa Bulletin, I think, as most of you are aware, is updated once each month. So currently we're operating with the June Visa Bulletin, and come the middle of June, somewhere around the middle of June, we expect the July Visa Bulletin, and we'll talk here in a few minutes a little bit about some possible projections for the future. So Mike, retrogression, right? We refer to it as the big R word. And for those candidates that have maybe been practicing in their profession for some time, they might recall the last time that retrogression was part of the processing reality. And I think it's really important that we take a few minutes and just relate to everyone how the current situation is similar and dissimilar from the last time there was a retrogression, and how this retrogression may be different. So, Mike, your thoughts on where we're at now versus our experience with retrogression in the past?
Yeah, I think one of the things that is foundational to understand is just this whole concept of why do we have retrogression? And we simply have it when the demand exceeds the supply. The demand being the demands for your talents and your skills in the U.S. healthcare field and your desire to come to the U.S. to practice in your particular chosen field versus the supply of green card numbers, which has been static for 30 years. We actually had an influx of visa numbers over the last 2 years, 2.5 years, due to COVID, due to the family numbers not being utilized. So to some degree, retrogression, except for COVID, would have probably hit a couple of years ago. But I think the big difference between the retrogression now and the large retrogression we saw, 15 years ago now, 14, 15 years ago, is the economy. The demand continues to stay extremely high. The projections from the Department of Labor and every other source, whether it be Becker's Hospital Association, any organization you look at, says the demand is going to stay strong from the U.S. facilities for needing healthcare workers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the economy is, even though it may be flat and there's some spots where there's some issues, for the most part, is continuing to, in spite of whatever television news show you watch, is continuing to kind of move along at a fairly decent pace, which was not the case 15 years ago. Why that's important is a couple things. Number one, it's important because as demand stays strong, hiring is going to continue. That's really critical for all of you because you want jobs, right? We don't want to be dropped. We don't want to be abandoned. All those kinds of things that retrogression conjures up from the last time of, oh, I have a friend and they got petitioned for and then they got abandoned. We're not seeing any of that and we don't expect any of that at this particular retrogression. Secondly, and I think maybe even more importantly, if we're looking at a long-term solution, and that long-term solution has to come from legislation, from Congress, it's difficult to get things through Congress, obviously, particularly the Congress we have right now. But when the economy went down in 08, 09, and the demand fell, there was no longer the political will to try to solve anything because it was as if there was no problem because the line's not as bad as it was because there is no line now because there's not this huge demand. Today, we're still getting tremendous pressure, which if you pick up any newspaper and look throughout the U.S., you see all kinds of articles about hospital systems, not just immigration lawyers, not just companies like Worldwide Health, saying retrogression is bad, retrogression is impacting us, retrogression is negative on our facility. And they talk to their congressional representatives, their lobbyists who go to Washington and take the message back. So in the past, you've had immigration lawyers, because we're obviously self-interested in this, just like you are. And we have companies like the Worldwides of the world that were very, very active, but because the demand was so low, because of the Great Recession or ever how you want to describe it, there wasn't the political will. Today, that's not the case. Today, we still got super strong demand. If anything, it's likely going to increase. And so I think we've got a lot more parties at the table saying, we need a solution. We need a solution fast. This is affecting healthcare at my facility. So I think that's the huge difference between now and what we had before, or at least that's my opinion.
Yeah, Mike, I would agree with you very strongly. So the economic conditions today are completely different than the last time we had retrogression. And I think, when we talk about Washington and perhaps legislative and regulatory reform, one thing that the pandemic did do, the pandemic did many things, but if there was anything positive that came out of it, I think it put the issue of U.S. healthcare workforce on the front page of newspapers week after week and month after month on the 6 o'clock news. So I think unless you're living under a rock, you would be aware that this is a significant issue. And I know a lot of work is being done from an advocacy perspective by groups such as the American Hospital Association, American Healthcare Association, certainly our trade group as international recruitment firms. I know, Mike, from an attorney perspective, I'm sure AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, is all over this issue as well. I'm actually going to be spending a day in Washington next week, meeting with some elected officials on this topic. So very good insights into how retrogression now is completely different than what it was, I guess, more than 10 years ago now. All right. So, Mike, this is, I think, really the crux of the issue where we're at today, and the question that we get from candidates, and I'm sure you've heard this many times as well, is, okay, there's retrogression. I'm an applicant. Whatever stage my application is at, maybe I'm just about to get started. Maybe my petition was recently filed. Maybe I'm at the NVC stage. And the question is very simply, what should I do now? Your thoughts on that, Mike?
Yeah, I think that's an obvious question. And I think I have a clear, simple, easy answer, is that you should do now what you were going to do before the May Bulletin came out. Your behavior should not change. If you're studying to take the NCLEX exam, if you're prepping for an English exam, if you're getting your visa screen, whatever you were planning on doing before, you should do now. In my opinion, there should be no behavioral changes. Here's how you should think of this retrogression. The process itself and all the criteria and the steps you have to take to meet, and frankly, the steps that your hospital facilities, healthcare facilities you're going to have to take, none of those have changed at all. Everything they had to do, they have to do now. Everything you have to do, you still have to do now. What has changed is the timing. So if we were projecting with no retrogression, and we were all saying, big picture on typical average from the time an I-140 is filed till the time you arrive, and we were saying maybe 8 to 10 months, kind of a time frame. I know some are a little faster, some a little slower, but that was kind of a good mix in the middle. We're now saying my prediction is about 16 to 20 months. So 8 to 10 to 16 to 20. Sure, that's a delay, and that's understandable that no one likes delays, but it's real. That's what it is. But the steps and the action items you have to take, in my opinion, don't change. So don't put anything off. Don't reschedule stuff. Move forward just like you were moving forward before.
All right. Really great information. Now, Mike, when you say 16 to 20 months, maybe let's just kind of set the parameters around what that 16 to 20 months is accounting for. Would that be the current anticipated timeline, let's say from time of filing to time of visa issuance? Would that be an accurate description?
That is correct. Time of filing the I-140 and then the time of visa issuance. That's my prediction.
Okay. Really, really good. So to the question of what should I do now, Mike, I would completely echo your comments in terms of the answer really is carry on, right? Keep calm and carry on. I think is really the best advice, because it is possible, right, that perhaps when we get to October, dates become current and you don't want to find yourself kind of behind, right, in the process because you've postponed taking the language test or getting started on your visa screen certificate. So I think the key takeaway here, in addition to just keep going, don't do anything differently, I think is to be prepared for dates perhaps becoming more current or becoming current. And the question is not, will I be able to arrive in the United States? I think the question is when will I arrive in the United States? Mike, I think you commented on that. Just any thoughts on that principle of, it's not a question of if, but a question of when?
Right. No, I think that's absolutely a good way to describe it. This doesn't change your ability to ultimately arrive here in the U.S. It just changes when you're going to do that. So the criteria have not changed. The demand hasn't changed. And so it just affects the timing. And I don't mean to belittle the effect on timing, because that is significant. You want to be here as quickly as you can. And this is obviously a delay. But when you're looking at it as a big picture goal of where do I want to be? Where do I see my future? If this is where you still want to see your future, then I think that this is a setback, a delay, but does not affect the ultimate goal.
All right. Very good. So I guess the other side of the coin with regards to the question of what should I do is the question, what should I not do? Right? What should I not do? And Mike, I've listed a couple of things here in terms of what candidates should not do. The first is you should not, as your first response to retrogression, be looking to switch employers or agencies. If you are working with a competent agency that has, demonstrated to you that they're doing the things they said they would do and not doing things that they ought not to be doing, there is nothing to be gained from switching employers or agencies. In fact, it could significantly complicate your case going forward. Not to mention the moral and ethical implications related to a commitment that you may have made where an employer or agency has acted in good faith to move your application forward. Again, as was already mentioned, do not postpone taking any of the required exams, primarily the English exam if you're already in process. And if you haven't yet started your immigration journey, there is absolutely no reason for you to postpone taking the NCLEX exam. I think everybody's aware that the next generation NCLEX exam was introduced on April the 1st. And initial feedback that we're receiving from candidates that are taking that exam is that they're not finding it to be more difficult than the previous version of the exam. So absolutely no reason whatsoever to delay taking the NCLEX exam. And the other really key thing is do not stop gaining clinical experience. We talk about the importance of clinical experience often, and we've done entire presentations on this. U.S. employers place a tremendously high value on clinical experience, and in particular, current clinical experience. So these are all things, that you should not be doing now. Some we covered, under what should I be doing. But Mike, any thoughts that you may have on this notion? Because we get contacted sometimes daily by applicants who say, I'm working with such and such an organization. I'd like to come, can you help me? I'd like to, all this sort of inquiry. Just from your perspective, switching employers and agencies and what the issues around that could be.
So a couple of points. First of all, we like to think, and I believe that it's true, that most employers and agencies have really good intentions and try to do a very, very good job. But there are some unscrupulous agencies out there. So if you are someone just reached out to me about 2 weeks ago who had been contacted by an agency who told them that retrogression did not affect their agency because they already had slots reserved. That's just completely 100% false. And there is no such thing. So you have to be careful when anyone, and this is true of most things in life, when someone tells you something that sounds too good to be true, then it probably is not true. And that certainly was not true. So you want to be extremely careful at what people are selling right now during this time of a little bit of uncertainty. But if you're switching employers now, so you're happy with your agency, but you decide you thought you wanted to go work in Montana, but now you've decided you really want to work in Boston because, they've got the Bruins and stuff, and you switch, then you're basically starting that I-140 process has to start all over again. You retain the priority date, but you have to start that process all over again. So depending on how quickly things move in October, you may be delaying your case by 6, 8, 9 months in a situation like that. So I think your best bet is to stay the course. Now, there may be certain circumstances where, life has changed and you'd want to reach out to your case manager and talk to them specifically. But I think generally speaking, the idea of staying the course is really important. And then a second point with respect to the visa screen. Visa screens are issued and they're good for 5 years, okay? So don't think that, I can't take my English exam now because my English exam is going to expire before I get my visa interview. The date of the visa exam, or the English exam, is relevant to getting the visa screen. It's not relevant once you go to the consulate. Once you have the visa screen, that's what they're looking at. They're no longer looking at when you took your NCLEX or when you took your English exam. So don't try to time it and delay that so it's still active when you go for your interview. There's no point to that. The visa screen, 5 years, 5-year life, plenty of time to get through any type of retrogression. So I would certainly not delay that. A couple other practical things while we're talking right now of what to do and what not to do is, and I've got kind of a couple of them. One is when all the dates were current, it may not have came to you to say, hey, by the way, I had an agency back in 2010 or 2011 who sponsored me, and that I got abandoned and all got dropped because it didn't matter. Well, it matters now. And so if you have an old approved I-140, whether you have a notice from the NVC, maybe you never got a copy of the approval notice, which would be typical, that's okay. There are a lot of ways. So if you have something that was done for you previously, make sure your case manager knows about what was done for you previously. So that's one thing that I think is very important today. Second thing is many of you are working international assignments already. You're maybe from the Philippines and you're working in Dubai right now, or you're in Ireland. You need to, when we talk about where you're going to have your interview, we need to look forward to the future of where are you going to be in, say, a year from now, a year and a half from now, depending on the circumstances in your case. So when you're filing your I-140 is when you choose the consulate you're going to go to. Anytime we switch consulates, it creates delays. Switching consulates is fraught with, every once in a while it'll go smoothly, but for the most part, it generally doesn't. So we want to try to avoid switching consulates. So if you know that you only have a year left on your contract in Ireland and you're just getting ready to file your I-140 now and you know it cannot be extended or you don't want to extend it, then don't pick Dublin as your place to go for your interview. Let's pick back in your home country because that's where you're going to be, not today, but a year from now, that's where you're going to be. So I think that's an important practical thing. And then the third kind of practical thing that I think is important is what do you do with family members? Keep in mind that your priority date has to be current when you get your interview and when you get your visa issued. But if your family's going to follow you, they have to also be current. So if let's say you're current in April of 2024, dates move forward for you, current in April 2024, but you're not going to bring your spouse and your kids over until the summer. In the summer, they may not be current. You may have to wait until October or November to then restart your family's process. So I think we need to make sure that you're talking to your case manager or the attorney assigned to your case to make sure that everybody understands your personal family circumstances and what you want to achieve for your family so that all that can be taken into consideration as to whether you process together. Maybe you process together, but then they simply don't fly over with you. Maybe there is a reason you're going to wait. But nonetheless, I think that that's not quite as simple of an answer as it was if all dates current. So those would be my takes on do's and don'ts.
Yeah, some very good points, Mike, particularly on the follow to join. We regularly get questions about that, and this issue certainly impacts how candidates should be thinking about that for certain. And also, really great point on the visa screen, right? English test is required for visa screen. English tests expire in a shorter period of time, generally a couple of years, but visa screen valid for 5 years. So if you can pass the language test and obtain your visa screen certificate, you don't need to worry about that language test expiring, at least for immigration purposes. And when you get invited to that to your embassy interview, you will be completely ready to go. I've got some thoughts on this topic, Mike. I think you touched on it just in passing, talking about previous retrogression. I know you're in touch with many U.S. healthcare employers on a daily basis. What are you hearing from them, as you respond to their questions from an employer's perspective about retrogression?
Yeah, so what I'm seeing right now is if you are an international RN and you are overseas, I'm seeing no slowdown or stoppage by U.S. employers at all. They're viewing this as a delay, and in their mind, a fairly insignificant delay, because they know they're going to have the same need or a worse need, whether it's in 6 months or 10 months or 14 or 18 or 20. The same demand is going to be there. They have the same need. So I'm seeing nothing. For those of you who may be on this call who are here in the U.S. and you're recent U.S. grads, there we're seeing some more issues because you only have 12 months on your OPT. And if you didn't find an employer to sponsor you for, say, the first 4 months of your OPT, now you're down to only 8 months left, and your case just got a lot more complicated. And we are seeing some slowdown and some simply no's out of U.S. grads. But if you're overseas, you're offshore, you're not affected by that. So we're seeing no stoppage whatsoever.
Right. I think from our perspective, we're having exactly the same conversations with our clients all over the country. They understand the timing issue. Obviously, they would hope and they would be happy if every international nurse could arrive next week, but that's just not reality, never has been. And I would say, Mike, in my assessment, more than ever, U.S. employers are viewing their staffing strategy with more of a medium and long-term view of the matter, because they understand demographically and societally and systematically, this is an issue that they're going to be dealing with for years to come. So a delay of 6 months or 10 months, or even if that delay gets somewhat longer, we're absolutely confident from our perspective here at Worldwide HealthStaff that the demand for international nurses is going to remain as strong as it has been the last couple of years. And, we're planning accordingly in terms of scaling and putting resources in place. So if you're an international nurse or an international medical laboratory technologist, or even working in other fields, the demand for experienced providers in the U.S. Is going to remain strong. I think there's really no question about that at all. Here's the big question, Mike. Next to what should I do now? The next question after that is, what's going to happen next? So to address the many questions that have already scrolled through in the chat today, let's talk a little bit about what we think may happen or not happen from where we're at today through to September 30th. And then if we think anything different might happen from October 1st onwards. And Mike, maybe just start by just briefly commenting on the significance of September versus October.
Yes. So September is the last month of the fiscal year, and October's the first. So for all of us in this space, including you, October 1st is kind of like Christmas. That's where we know we get a bunch of new numbers and we're all excited and we get to see where things are going to go. One of the things that I think is important when we talk about October 1st onwards, and I'll come back to between now and September in a second, but there's two charts that come out in the Visa Bulletin each month. There's what they call a final action date chart, and that's the one that based upon when you get your interview and when you can actually have your visa issued. And then there's what they call the date for filing chart. And for people in the U.S., that's particularly important because that's when they can file their I-45 cases. And the USCIS does not always honor the dates for filing chart, but often they do. But for those of us who are dealing with a lot of offshore and you're working offshore, the date for filing lets you know what the government predicts is going to happen. So with the visa allotment. So generally speaking, we look at date for filing chart as a prediction as to what they're going to get through for that next fiscal year. So the date for filing chart, think of it as a future prediction, and the final action date chart kind of moves along toward that date. So when we see the in September, roughly around September 15th, 18th, somewhere in that neighborhood, and we see the October Bulletin, we're going to be very excited and looking at the final action date chart because that's when you can get your interview. But we're also going to be looking for the date for filing chart as a prediction as to how far the Visa Bulletin will progress during the course of the year. So I personally do not believe the dates will all become current on October 1st. There are some people that do, and they could be right, and I could be wrong, and I would be very happy to be wrong in that case. But I do expect forward movement in October. I think that I certainly expect that there is the possibility that the rest of the world will become a little bit, right now, the rest of the world and the Philippines are on the exact same schedule. I do not know that that will continue come October. We've got some odd things that have happened on the Visa Bulletin for non-healthcare workers between the EB2 and EB3 categories that I think is impacting the rest of the world that I think are ultimately going to get kind of worked out. But I do expect forward movement in October, but I don't expect it to go current. Now, between now and September 30th, the end of the fiscal year, I expect no forward movement whatsoever. I do not believe that the bulletin is going to go forward between now and September. I'd like to be wrong on that, but that one I'm fairly confident in. If anything, it could go further backwards and further retrogress. One of the things, if you subscribe to the Visa Bulletin, and it's free, it's a publication from the Department of State, and you can get it. You can sign up at the Department of State's website, and they'll send it to you in your, email inbox. And there's links for it and everything else. One of the things that's important to do, we all look at the charts, but if you go to the back of the bulletin, usually the last page or the next to last page, often they will write notes as to what they think is going to happen. So, for example, if we were to go back and we were to look at the May Visa Bulletin, okay, the one that made us all cry, is on page 8 of the May Visa Bulletin, okay, there's a comment about visability in the employment-based third preference for the rest of the world, Mexico and Philippines. That's the retrogression we're talking about. And they talk about that, hey, they predicted this in March, and they've had to put a hold on this and retrogress some. And then they make a statement that says, this situation will be continually monitored and any necessary adjustments will be made accordingly. They're not saying we think we're done for the year. They're saying we may have to make further adjustments. In the June bulletin, there was no such further comment. They had to comment on some other categories. But if we see further retrogression between now and September, don't view that as negative. View that as we're just being efficient and using up all the visas that are available. And I don't think if there's further retrogression between now and September, it changes my prediction on October whatsoever. So don't be terribly concerned between the summer.
Right. Well, we'll certainly be on standby for that October visa bulletin in mid-September. I know you will, Mike. I know we are. And it'll be interesting to see where things are at. But I would echo your comments also. I don't think we're going to see any forward movement between now and October the 1st. But again, that doesn't change in any way the things we've already been talking about today in terms of the things that you should and should not be doing right now to put yourself in the very, very best position to move forward on your journey to the United States. So with that, we do have some time remaining in our allotted time, and I know a number of questions have been scrolling through as Mike and I have been speaking and sharing some thoughts. So CJ, I'll turn it over to you to help sort of walk us through some questions.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Ron. Yep, so I've seen a lot of questions from the chat, and a lot of the questions have been answered throughout the presentation. So let's start with a question from Charmaine. She said, "Hi, I just want to ask, what if there's a movement on the new fiscal year? Is it still going to be roughly 16 to 20 months process from the time of filing of I-140?
Mike?
Yeah, so she's referring to my comment earlier on the timing, and I believe so. I would like to be wrong. I would like for it to go all the way back to current, so we're back to the 8 to 10 months, but I don't see that happening. So forward movement simply means that right now we're stuck on June 2022, and forward movement would mean some of those individuals, maybe some of yourselves, who were filed in third quarter, fourth quarter of 2022 are going to move forward. But I don't think it's going to change the overall timing. That remains my prediction for right now.
Yeah. I would agree. So CJ, next question, please.
Okay, so this next question is, I've seen this one a lot from other nurses. So this question is from Ivan. He said, "Hello, sir, from Philippines. May I ask if there are any possibilities during the retrogression period the employer may abandon or terminate the offer? And how will it affect the applicant? If so, what will be the result?"
Yeah, I'll take the first pass at that one. Ivan, as we were able to comment just a few moments ago, I sincerely believe that employers, particularly hospital-based employers, are going to remain committed to their international candidates for the reasons that both Mike and I shared in terms of the demand being very, very strong. If anything, the demand even increasing, and with the forward outlook being that additional nurses will be needed for many years to come. So I think while the question is a very good one and a very appropriate one, my advice would be that you can remain confident that your sponsoring employer will continue on with your application, and you should be doing those things that we've talked about to continue to prepare and put yourself in the best position. Mike, maybe take a moment and maybe just comment on, in the unlikely event that an employer did abandon their international strategy, where would that typically leave a candidate at that point in time?
Okay, so a little background on that. So it matters at what stage of the process you were abandoned. So let's assume that you're abandoned after your I-140 was filed and approved. So the day your I-140 was filed becomes your priority date or your spot in the queue. Once that I-140 is approved, except in very rare circumstances, which would not be, in my opinion, relevant at all in this context, that priority date becomes your priority date. So you keep your spot in the queue. So if you filed today, May, whatever today is, the 23rd or whatever it is, May 23rd, that's your priority date. And so let's say 5 months from now, you get abandoned, worst case scenario, then Ron's team at Worldwide are going to find you another placement. They're going to find you a new employer, and that new employer is now going to file for you a new I-140. Here's the thing that's important to note. That new I-140, let's say it's filed in December of this year, December 2023, the new employer files a new I-140 for you. The priority date on that new case filed in December 2023 is going to be May 23rd under my hypothetical 2023. So you do not fall back in the line simply because a new employer filed for you. You're continuing to move forward in the retrogression line all the way up through the time until you get your interview. They simply retain the old priority date. So worst case scenario, as long as a new employer is found, we call it recapturing that old priority date. You don't lose your spot in the line. And I think that's really critical when we're talking a line that might be, if we're talking, say, 18 months long.
Yeah.
The effect, if you're abandoned fairly early in the process after your I-140 is filed, you may ultimately see no impact whatsoever. Now, the later you're abandoned, the longer you're going to have a delay. But the bottom line, you keep your spot in the queue. So you have some security, something that you can hold on to, that you kind of own the rights to under the immigration laws.
Yeah. In many ways, if a candidate does have an approved I-140 with an existing priority date and the right experience, there would be many employers that would certainly have an interest in helping that candidate to continue to move forward with their immigration journey to the U.S. All right, CJ, we've got time for a couple more. So what's the next question?
Okay, sure. This next question is from Camille, and the question is, how about the H-1B visa route? Will that be okay just to bypass the retrogression? What is your opinion?
Yeah, really interesting question. Mike, what's your opinion?
Yeah, there's a little background on the H-1B. The H-1B is a visa that is given to what they refer to as legally specialty occupation. You have to demonstrate that the position you're going to fill has a mandatory minimum educational requirement of at least a bachelor's degree. So if you're a physical therapist, a med tech, an OT on this call, you're going to qualify for an H-1B visa. If you're a registered nurse, at most institutions in the U.S., a bachelor's, a BSN, is not a mandatory requirement, which means that you would not qualify for the H-1. Not because you don't have a BSN, because you probably do, but because the job you're going to, there are no states in the U.S. that require a BSN for licensure, which means they're going to look at the hospital facilities requirements. And if the hospital can demonstrate that, yes, a BSN is a mandatory requirement here, we do not hire RNs who don't have a BSN, then you qualify for an H-1. But there's very few of those hospitals. So that's one thing. The second thing to think about is that we only have a certain allotted number of H-1Bs given out per year. And those are given out as part of a lottery. And the lottery happens in March of each year, with filings starting in April and then effective date in October. There's 85,000 H-1s that they give out each year. And this year there were about 800 some thousand filings for those 85,000. It worked out because of the math and how many people they actually choose who they knew were going to drop out. It worked out to about a 15% selection rate. So even if you're with a hospital where the qualifications are met, the odds of being picked in the lottery are small. And then the other thing to keep in mind is there are certain facilities, hospital facilities, that are what are called cap exempt, which means they don't have to go through the lottery. So those are facilities where they're a nonprofit affiliated with a university. So your typical university hospitals. So if you happen to have a university hospital, and I'm using that as an example, that has a BSN requirement, then the H1 may be an option for you. And I'm sure that Ron and his team and that your case manager is going to look at that as a possibility, because if that is a possibility, you're right, you would bypass retrogression, because retrogression only applies in the immigrant visa or green card context, not in the H1B non-immigrant visa context. So absolutely be a case. There's just very, very limited a number of those options.
Good. Okay. And I would, at this point, Mike, maybe just reiterate a point that you made earlier about if it's too good to be true, it usually is. And I think international nurses in particular need to be very alert for any solicitation or any representation that says, we've got the secret formula to get you an H-1B visa. Again, it is possible, but it's extremely difficult, and the number of employers that qualify are really, really small. So if you're seeing solicitations or representations about, hey, we've got the secret sauce for getting H-1B visas, and in particular, if you're being asked to pay money for any sort of processing, anything at all, major red flags, major caution to be exercised. And so I would just add that caution when we're talking about H-1B visas as well. I had a call this morning in this vein from a client of ours that was wondering if we had subcontracted some of our recruitment to another agency, because this agency had contacted them and said that they were now authorized by us to recruit on their behalf. So just caution at all times as you move forward. As was mentioned earlier, the vast majority of recruiters are honest and ethical, but it's always a tragedy when someone gets caught up in the web of someone who isn't. CJ, let's take one more question, and then we'll kind of start to wrap up our time together today.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so before reading the last question, I just want to share our refer a nurse program. So I just put the link on the chat. So if you have a nurse friend, you can refer it with us. And I have my friend already referred like 2 nurses, and he already got like $500 from this program. So this one is really awesome. So go and refer your nurse friends now. And also please like us on Facebook to be updated on the latest news. So we're done with our last question, and this is from Patrick. And the question is, do you think it will take 5 years for retrogression to be lifted?
Mike, 5 years?
Absolutely not. As I'm saying, in the 16 to 20 months time frame, and generally I put things in blocks, and so I'm looking right now at a block that's under 2 years. With closer to 1.5 years, but in that neighborhood. So no, I do not. Anyone that's predicting 5 years, I do not believe that's accurate or based upon any data whatsoever. All
right, very good. CJ, thanks for triaging these questions for us. I'm pretty sure, as always, that we haven't gotten to every one of them. But if you have a question that hasn't been addressed, please feel free to reach out to us directly. We'd be happy to respond, and if we don't have the answer, we'll collaborate and reach out to Mike, and we'll see that you get the information that you need. A couple of things from my side as we wrap up this morning. CJ just popped up the slide about like us on Facebook. We're closing in we're just a few thousand likes away from 100,000. So we kind of have a bit of a challenge that we've given each other here at the HealthStaff office to try and reach 100,000 likes before we reach June 30th, because on July 1st we're starting a formal celebration of our 25th anniversary. So that's something that we're trying to accomplish. So if you can help with that, that would be greatly appreciated. Please continue to be on the lookout for further sessions and further webinar presentations that we will have on this topic of retrogression, as well as other topics that we are regularly sharing information with. If you're in the process of prepping for an English language test, I'd encourage you to check out on our YouTube channel, Carrie's Corner, Carrie, K-A-R-I. Carrie is our in-house English language instructor, and she has just some amazing, very practical content. Mike, you'd love this. Last week's installment of our English language coaching was filmed inside of a Walmart store, including interviewing people in the checkout line.
I like that.
Yeah. Now, if that isn't going to get you some real life English language skills, I don't know what will.
It's going to get you some language skills. Yes.
But anyway, Carrie does a great job to present, really, really great information in really, really interesting ways. So feel free to check that out. We look forward to continuing to provide the information that you need, regardless of where in the world you are living, regardless of what stage in the process that you're at. Mike, just before we wrap up this morning, sort of any final thoughts or any final words of encouragement that you would share with our group today?
Yeah, I think the big thing I would say is just stay the course. Keep your eyes on the ultimate goal, not on what could be perceived as a setback we have right now. Think of this as a timing change only, not a change that impacts your ultimate goal.
All right. Mike, thanks as always for taking the time out of your day. I know you're extremely, extremely busy, so just great appreciation and thank you for taking time out of your day. It's always a privilege to be able to have you join us, so thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome, and we appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
All right. And to everyone that's joined us today, thank you also for your interest. I trust that we were able to share some information with you that has been helpful. Please continue to be on the lookout for information on further presentations. We're always, looking forward to having as many of your colleagues, yourself and your colleagues, join us as possible. And stay tuned. In the next short while, you'll start to see a lot of information. We're planning, Mike, I don't know if I even shared this with you, in celebration of our 25th anniversary. In the second half of this year, we're planning on visiting 25 cities around the world with various live events. And the first of those are going to be in Kenya and South Africa and Germany in June, followed up by many others shortly thereafter. So thank you again for your interest, everyone. We wish you well on your immigration journey to the United States. You will be receiving an email with a recording of this presentation within the next 24 hours. Please feel free to save that and review this for reference information in the future. Again, please remember the information discussed here today is in the context of where we're at today with regards to retrogression in the visa bulletin. So if you're reviewing this 6 months from now, the information here may not be entirely current or up to date. And also feel free to share the link with the recording of this presentation with your friends and colleagues that you believe may be interested as well. So thank you again. I wish you all a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week. And until next time, bye for now.